Okay, let's take a look at the part questions for this practice exam. In this case, we have an IPS part. So the first thing I want to do is make sure I'm in inch/pound/second. That's usually the best place to start. I have an arbitrary part origin. Answer should be in 3 decimal places. I'm using PVC rigid plastic, so I'll change my material. Right-clicking on material and then editing material. I'm going to go to plastics. I'm going to look for PVC. So polyvinyl chloride, here I have PVC rigid, and it says the density is 1,300 kilograms per meters cubed, which is the same as I have it on here. So I know that I have the correct material in that case. We've got that, so now our part is set up. I do have an A and a B on here. It's not necessarily a bad idea to go through and look at the different parts and check and see, hey, are those A and B's actually changing? In this case, they are changing, they're both changing. So I'm going to use my equations to define A and B. So I'm going to say A is equal to, and the first question I have 1.125, so 1.125. And then B, I have that equal to 3.00. And I'll accept those by clicking OK. And then I'll take a
Laura,
look
can
at,
you go back and show me where you found like the equation button?
yeah, so equations, again, to see what those, if you go into tools. And another thing I like to do is that if you're not seeing this file menu, you have to hover over the SOLIDWORKS option first. I like to pin that so it's always shown, and then I
Okay.
don't have to go to SOLIDWORKS first. And then you can go to tools and then scroll down to equations. So getting used to finding that is fairly helpful. Again, if you don't remember where things are, I wouldn't stress about it during a CSWA. What I'd do is I'd go to the search commands here and then type in equations,
Okay, got it.
and then you can just go to equations from there. And sometimes, depending on what you're looking for, that's faster than trying to go through menus anyways.
Okay, thank you.
Either way, that'll help. Let me go back to my split screen here. All right, so here we want to take a look at all 3 of these sections for this part really before we get started. This one is our first piece, fairly simple. What I'm doing is I'm adding some rounds and some cutouts there. Again, not terribly difficult, but I want to make sure I'm able to take advantage of the symmetry that's in the first part as part of that second part. The symmetry is being maintained. And then the last part here, again, we're adding some cutouts and some additional geometry, which is also being shown as symmetric. So keeping symmetry in this part is going to be very, very important to me. So I want to make sure that when I draw this, I'm going to draw it and then kind of mirror it across and do the cutouts. I can decide which one of these I want to start off with, kind of the front view as it's shown here, or the right, or the top. The top looks like it's mostly the holes, so I'm probably going to do that afterwards. And then the side here doesn't have as much of the consistent geometry. On this right view, the thickness of this cutout is pretty much the same all the way through, with the exception of these hole cutouts on the top. So I'm actually going to start in this right view, and I'm going to make sure I'm starting in the right view on the right view, if that makes sense. So right plane for the right view. It's going to help keep it consistent relative to what I have in the drawings. So I'm going to sketch on that right plane. And again, I want this to be symmetric, so I'm not going to draw the whole thing. I'm just going to draw half of it. And to keep myself aligned, I'm going to go ahead and put a center line that's vertical attached to the origin, and I'll use that as my reference for where the symmetry is going to exist. And again, freehand drawing half of this part, so I'm just going to go across, up, over, up, crossed, down to the center, and then close it off so it's a closed contour. Again, I'm trying to draw half of the geometry that I'm given. And then I want to put all the dimensions that are inside this part on this view. So the first thing I have here, if I start from the top and work my way around, is I have A. Remember, if I use that center line as a reference, I can pull that over to the opposite side of the center line to get the width of the center slot. Set that equal to by pressing the equals key and then global variables A. If I click it correctly, there we go. And now that's set to my A value, and I don't have to worry about coming back into the sketch to change it. Kind of the same thing for my B. I can go from the top line to the bottom line, say equal to global variables B. And now, other than updating my values inside the profile, I don't have to worry about changing that or updating it. I have the width of this top part as 0.25, so I'll do 0.25. Same thing on this bottom section, it has a width of 0.25, so I'll give it a value of 0.25. We have the total width here across the bottom. I didn't type that in right. Let me fix it real quick. 0.25. I had 0.25. This total width as 3. And again, if I want to get the 3, I can go to the right side, the opposite side of the line that I selected from the center line, and give that a width of 3. And then the height of this inside portion is 0.5. I want to try and put my my dimensions in the same location as they're given, just so it makes it a little bit easier for me to make sure I've got everything in place. So I'm just going to clean this up a little bit. And you can see that I have all of the dimensions that are given inside this right view. And I can compare and I can see that that looks a lot like what I'm given here. So from there, I'm going to extrude this out. I got to figure out how wide I want to extrude it. The total width of this part from the front view is 3. So that's what I'll use. I'm going to use a mid-plane extrude because this is going to help keep the origin of my part in the middle of the part, which will allow me to do kind of as few edits to this as possible. So there's my mid-plane with a width of 3. That looks good. And then I'm going to mirror this whole thing about the front plane. And you can see that gives me a lot of the basic geometry right off the bat. Once I've got that view kind of finished, I can move on to the next one. So I could go to the top view here for the holes, or I could go to the right view here for these side portions. And I can actually do that before or after the mirror. I'll go before the mirror because it makes things a little bit easier for me. And I'm going to draw the geometry that I have here. So again, I'm going to go to the front plane because this is the front view. And I'm going to sketch on that front plane. And then what I want is I want to cut out everything that is in this view. So I have the 1-inch circle in the middle. I've got a arc of 1-inch radius coming across the top. So I'm going to do another circle. I'm actually make that tangent with the top. I've got 2 lines that I'm just going to assume are tangent coming off the sides. And then I also want to have this top and these side lines to serve as another area for the cutout. This is going to have 2 closed contours in it. I have one set of contours for the top and then another contour for the hole. And this might actually be a little bit easier to do in 2 separate sketches, but we'll see how this goes and we can modify it if we need to. So this is going to have top radius of 1. This is going to have a diameter of 1. I lost my tangent relation there, so I'm going to add that back in. And I want the distance from the bottom of the part to this corner to be 1 as well. So I'm going to click on the bottom of the part and the corner here, make that equal to 1. I want these 2 to be equal and at the same height. So I'm going to put a horizontal relation on these 2 points, so they have to stay horizontally aligned. And I'll also make these 2 lines equal, and that'll keep it symmetric. So now we're fully defined. Again, we always want to be fully defined. We can see exactly what that sketch looks like by kind of coming out of plane a little bit. And I do have 2 contours here. I may have to select those manually. We'll see how it goes. Go into Features, Extruded Cut. It looks like it's not cutting through there. Let's switch the direction of the cut. And I may have to go through and say, yeah, use these contours. And we get the cut out there. Now when I mirror, I want to make sure I'm adding that cut extrude to my mirror as well. Let me just make sure that works. If I am confident that that cut extrude is going to work, I don't have to do that right away. I can wait until after I have the holes as well. Last thing I'm going to do is I'm going to add the holes. I'm actually just going to add 1 hole, and then I'll mirror it, and then I'll mirror the mirror. So I'm going to go back before my mirror exists. I'm going to sketch on the top plane. I'm going to put in 1 hole with a diameter of 0.25. I'll set the distance of the hole from the sides to 0.25 as well. As well as from kind of, I'll call that the front. So that's 1 fully defined circle. I'm going to use that for a cut extrude. I'll use through all. And then I'm going to mirror that about the right plane. And then I'm going to unsuppress my mirror 1, and I'll add my mirror 2 to my mirror 1. So that way those holes show up on all 4 corners. And each of them is going to have that same spacing of 0.25. Again, the advantage there is it makes it very easy for me to edit that circle, that hole, if I need to make a change later on. I'll compare this relative to the question and make sure I have something that matches. So I'll evaluate mass properties. It wants to know what the mass of the part is in pounds. I've got 0.28. We want it in 3 decimals, so I'll use customer settings, change it to 3. Again, this is just in the options menu here. You can change this to use custom settings or the document settings. You could also change it using the document settings for the part and then have it be different for the whole time. But that works fine. And again, we've got a mass of 2.75 pounds, which matches exactly the first option on this set. So we can go ahead and go on to the next part. In part B, we have a new A and a new B. We're going to create the modifications using the center cut as shown in the view here. First thing I want to do though is update my A and my B. So I'm going to go back to my equations. So tools, equations. I'll set my A to 1.25 and my B to 2.75. And you can see that my drawing did update. It got a little bit stouter. You want to make sure you do that before you start making too many changes, because you may have errors you need to resolve when you change A and B, depending on how you've made the part. Hopefully you've made it in a a reasonably resilient way that doesn't cause issues, but you want to fix those before you add more complexity, because it's gonna be harder to fix it once there's more complexity there. All right, in here we have some rounds on all 4 corners. Again, I could include that in my mirrors. I can just add it since it's just 4 selections, probably just as fast to go ahead and just add it using the features. So I'm gonna use a fillet, a radius of 0.25, and then I'll click the 4 corners of the part. Again, because this is not part of an A or a B or a C or anything like that, I'm probably not gonna have to change this later on. And it's easier to make those 4 selections than it is to roll back through my part. So I'm fine just doing that. I also have 4 sets of fillets on kind of this front view. So again, I did the top one. These are all 0.125. So I'm gonna go back into fillet, change it to 0.125. And then I have 4 selections here. So 1, 2, 3, 4. This also helps me to explicit that I'm kind of following each of the views and knocking out, like I did before, all the geometry in each view one at a time. Now I've got a section view and there's a cutout here that's showing that the middle portion of the part has been cut. It's because it's important to note here that the cross hatching on the section views can have different sizes and textures. So this one's kind of like a grid, whereas some of the ones we've seen before are just lines. Try not to let that distract you. It's just a difference in display style. We've got 2.25 rounds on the corners of this part, and you can kind of see those here as well. So let's go ahead and do those first to finish off our fillets. So 0.25, and it's a little confusing that this is 2 because it's actually 4, but the 2 are being mirrored. It's the same edge. It's just projected across the cut. So if you imagine this line, these 2 lines as being one continuous edge before the center portion is cut out, that's why it says it's 2 instead of 4. So that looks good. And then I have this center cut. So I need to go into my front plane. And again, all I'm going to do is I'm going to specify the radius of this arc. And I'll do that by doing a center point circle that is concentric with these outer circles. It doesn't really matter which one I use, this arc or the center circle. I'll give it a diameter of 1.625 times 2, because that's a radius. And to keep it consistent, I will change the leader type to a radius so I can make sure that that value does match what I'm given. And then that's fine. All I have to do is do that to do the cut extrude. I'm going to do extrude cut. I'm going to do up to surface because I want this cut to go all the way to the face on both sides. So go direction 2, do the same thing, up to surface. And now I don't have to worry about having that change. I do know that that width is A, so if I wanted to, I could use a midplane and then set the distance to A, and that would work just as well. So let's take a look at that, as you can see the difference. Equal to global variables A. And you can see that either way that cuts up to the faces. So again, pick your poison. Either of those should work just as well. I've got the radius here. I've got this dimension. B didn't really change, just showing it again so you can see where it is. I've got the R4s on there. I've got the R4 on here, sorry, the 4X curves on those. I should be good with this second part of the drawing. And again, we can kind of note that our revisions are typically faster than the original part creation. So I'll evaluate mass properties. Oh, I have my mass properties down here in the corner, which is another thing that happens sometimes. If I don't close this, it can get kind of pushed off to the side. So I don't know if you see it down here in the bottom left-hand corner of my screen, but you can pull that up to get the values back out. And I'm going to get the mass in pounds to 3 decimal places. Make sure you're in the right units. Make sure you include all 3 decimals in it. And then we can go to the next part. All right, final revision of this section. We're going to have a new A and a new B. So I'm going to start with that. I'm going to go into my tools, equations, set my A to 1.3. Set my B to 2.85. Click OK. And if I don't see that automatically update, I can click on the rebuild button. And you can always go back and check and make sure you've got those values in correctly. Should be good. And we need to make some more modification to this. We're assuming that all dimensions that are not shown are the same. So that should be pretty straightforward. Here we've got a, looks like a little bit of a pocket that's been added to the sides of this. There's also an additional feature added into this portion here. Some of the confusion in this that I would expect to see is that note that the pocket on the bottom has this distance A still. And so these circles coming into the middle of the part are actually going to be thinner than the distance A. And so this 0.05 needs to come up away from that face. So maybe let's start with that feature first, because I can see where that could be confusing. I'm going to come up to before my mirror, just so I can include this feature in my mirror tool. So I'm going to roll all the way back. And then I'm going to add this round kind of 0.05 extrude up off the top of this feature. So I'm actually going to sketch on the inside face of this part. Now I'm not given a size for the extrusion of the center piece. But if I look at this isometric view, I can see that it actually extends from the original kind of top rounded face of the part. So all I need to do is I need to convert that feature into a entity inside my sketch and then transfer it from an arc to a complete circle. And to do that, I'm gonna do that one more time so you can all see it. All I'm doing is I'm clicking the arc, clicking convert entities, and then dragging one of the endpoints around to get a full circle. If that makes you uncomfortable, the other thing you can do is just create a new circle. It doesn't really matter where you put it. And I can make that new circle co-radial with the arc, and that'll do the same thing. So co-radial just means it has the same radius and the same center as the original arc. So that gives me the circle I'm going to start off with. And then I also want the center circle, so I'll convert that one. So I've got that donut shape. I'm going to extrude that to a height of 0.05, which you can see is actually quite shallow. I don't want to do this as a midplane. I need it as a blind because it needs to come that far out from the surface. So again, be careful as to what you're using as your extrude options. I'll accept that. And then there's also a 0.05 radius round on the edge of this, which you can kind of see here because there's 2 lines rather than 1 line on the back portion of that. Actually can't see it because it's still just one because it's a curved face instead of a flat face. You can see it a little bit on the corner here where the round transitions from the side to the center portion. So I'm going to go into fillet tool, change the value to 0.05, click on this inner edge, and you can see that kind of transition. And it should look just like I'm given in that isometric view. So that looks pretty good. I'm going to unsuppress my mirror. I'm going to make sure I'm adding those 2 features by editing my mirror to include that extrude and the fillet. And then I can kind of roll back out through the rest of my part. And oh, that's not going to work because I'm cutting out that part first. well, let's do this. We have to we have to mirror that again after the original one. So let's go to our mirror one. I'm gonna edit that. I'm actually gonna remove the boss extrude 2 and the fillet 4 from that mirror. And the problem here is that my cut extrude here was cutting out that portion as well. So I do need to move those extrudes later in my sketch. So I'm gonna take these two and move them down till after that cut extrude has existed. Then I'll do a new mirror to get them on both sides. And we'll try using a geometry pattern if the regular mirror doesn't work. Still doesn't want to do that. Let's see if we can just do just the extrude and not the fillet. Okay, so it didn't want to let us extrude or mirror the fillet as well. So instead, I'm just going to move the fillet to after the mirror, and then we'll edit that to include both sides. I probably could have also modified this cut extrudes, that way it didn't cut things out above this feature. And then that would allow me to get away with that. But this works just fine. So again, just I guess an example there, unintended, showing some ways of working a different way if the way you originally plan it doesn't quite work out. That looks okay. Let's work on this pocket. Again, I've got the dimensions that I needed from here. I haven't got this 0.125, so I'm not really done with this view yet, but that's the depth of this pocket. So I'll come over here to the side view. There's nothing in the top view, so I can kind of ignore that one for now. And what I have is a 0.1 inch offset from the perimeter of this face, as well as from the circle on the middle of the part. So I'm going to sketch on that outer face. And I'm going to offset the entities from the face. I'll reverse it so it comes in. I've already got the 0.1, so I'm okay with that. I'm going to do the same thing with the inner circle. I'm just going to offset that with the distance of 0.1. I'm okay with that. So I've got these two offset dimensions just kind of as they're given inside the part. I also have 8 rounds. This is really 4 on this side and 4 on the opposite side. And it looks like they're all a radius of 0.1 inches. I don't know if that applies to these arcs or not, but let's go ahead and put it in and see what it looks like. So I'm going to do a sketch fillet, give that a radius of 0.1, give that a radius of 0.1. I'll accept those. That looks pretty good. I'll try putting in a smart dimension for this arc and seeing what its value is. It's actually got a slightly larger radius of 0.15. So we can make this driving and then remove the offset from the feature. Oh, it still says it's overdefined. Let me try removing the offset from the opposite side as well. And yeah, it still doesn't like me having that in there. So what I can do is I can actually delete those arcs. Then I can add them back in after merging these points, so that way they have the radius that I want. So I'm going to merge these points here on both sides. I'm going to drag them around so they're unfixed. And then I can go through and I can add that radius of 0.1 to each of those. So a slightly tighter radius than was given. That should be okay. So I'm going to extrude cut this. And the distance I want to cut this out is 0.125, shown in the side view. I'll accept that. And then there's also a round on the bottom of this, which I'm gonna assume is 0.1 as well. Based off what's given, I don't see a dimension in the side view showing what that radius is. So I'm gonna click on this back face, add a fillet, give it a value of 0.1, and then I'll accept that. And again, I can look and see, does this make sense by looking at how this sketch is given? You notice I do come to a point on here and I have a point inside this part. So that looks pretty good. And the radius of the cut, we'll actually go to a section view so we can see what this looks like. Go to our right view. Again, I compare the geometry of what I can see on there to what's given inside the part, and that looks pretty good. I do need to mirror this so it shows up on both sides. So I'll take that cut and the fillet, and I'll mirror that about my front plane. If I have to do the fillet separately, I will, but let's just see if that works. That looks good. So I can go back to the full view, kind of look at it one more time, make sure it looks like the way I want it to look. Again, if I want to, I can go to my isometric view, set the same angle as shown there, and that looks pretty good. We can actually even see that my origin is in the same spot as it is on the original piece because it's shown right there. It gives me an indication that I am indeed following the design intent of this part. So I will go to evaluate mass properties. This is a mass of 0.224 pounds. Again, go to my quiz, paste in the mass, and then I can go to the next part of the exam. I'm going to pause there for a bit for questions, and then I will come back with the last piece, the assemblies.